Good evening, everyone. I'm Melody Capote, Executive Director of the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute. We welcome you to Curators in Conversation, our public program series dedicated to critical debate, dialogue, and engagement with curators of color who are committed to the artistic and cultural production of the African diaspora. This series is a part of a larger commitment of the Center's mission to provide much needed programs and initiatives to elevate the voice and the voices and work of curators of color. For this month's iteration of Curators in Conversation, I am thrilled to introduce our very own Curator-at-Large, Grace Aneiza Ali, who usually hosts this series. Tonight, however, we are celebrating her new edited publication, Liminal Spaces, Migration and Women of the Guyanese Diaspora, which is an intimate exploration of the art and migration narratives of 15 women of Guyanese heritage. The book is a full circle moment for us here at the center. In 2017, we mounted a very successful exhibition by the same name, Liminal Space, curated by Grace, which honored the presence of the Guyanese community here in New York City. Many people don't know how the Guyanese Caribbean community is the 5th largest immigrant group in New York City. We were thrilled to celebrate this dynamic group of Guyanese artists in our newly opened Firehouse space. We've put a link to the chat for you to see a virtual tour of the exhibition that was featured in our partnership with Google Arts and Culture. And I'm excited to see so many of the Guyanese women artists from this exhibition featured in Grace's book, in expanded essays about their art practices. And I'm especially pleased to learn that the exhibition presented at the center was such an inspiration for Grace's book. We are really happy to be in conversation with Grace tonight, along with award-winning Barbados-born artist, researcher, and curator, Alberta Whittle. She is the winner of the 2020 Turner Bursary and the Frieze Artist Award and Henry Moore Foundation Award. Alberta is also a PhD candidate at Edinburgh College of Art and is a research associate at the University of Johannesburg. Tonight, Alberta and Grace will focus their conversation on the art and curating of Guyanese women artists in her new book, and they will also dialogue about their shared priorities to use their curatorial practices to center Caribbean art and the work of Caribbean women artists. We want to remind you to add your questions and comments for both Grace and Alberta in the chat, and they will answer them later in the program. Please welcome Grace Ali and Alberta Whittle.
Hi.
Hey, it's so good to see you.
Are we back?
Yes, I
Hi.
can hear you now. Hello.
Hi, Alberta. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's just beautiful to be able to see you and talk about your gorgeous book. It just moved me to tears and shook me in every way. It was such a delight to actually have the chance to think about your work after meeting in Havana a year ago. I can't believe it's only been a year since I've known you.
No, it feels like too many years, but good years. Good too many years.
Yeah, no, it really does. And I remember how when we first really started talking over tea and shared lunches, we realized there was so much in common about our experience of leaving the Caribbean and leaving sometimes with quite a fractured family and moving to a new space and trying to make our way and trying to also be part of how our family made their way in this new and in sometimes quite difficult and contested space. And I just feel like it's a wonderful circle to now come back and continue that conversation.
You know, what I remember that I love so much was, first of all, meeting your mama. If she's
Oh,
watching, hi,
my mommy
mama.
loves you.
I love her. Caribbean mothers.
They're the
Caribbean
best.
mothers. What can you do? I think my mama is watching. I hope my mom is watching. I told her to watch, and my sister. But I remember just seeing just the warmth and support that your mother shows towards your practice. And I remember showing up at your gallery and just sitting with you and shooting the breeze and just, you know, hanging out and staying with you as people came by. And I think that was one of my best times in Havana with you, is just sitting in your gallery with you and watching people come through your show. It was lovely. And sharing your lunch. You shared your
Oh,
lunch.
sharing those lunches.
You shared your lunch.
I think for us, you know, my mom and I, we were so happy to be together because we're not always, you know, in the same space. She's still in Barbados, I'm in the UK, and going to Havana meant that we could almost meet in this middle ground. And, you know, she is always so supportive and takes such joy in my practice. It was beautiful to have her there. And also, I think she really felt like you were a third daughter to her. You know, you
Oh,
really felt like family, and it was very grounding in Havana to make family.
yeah.
And there was somehow almost like a point of recognition in those shared experiences. I think we were close to the same age because I was 13 when I moved to the UK, and you were 14?
14. Yes.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah. You know, so much of this book, the book actually starts out with mothers and daughters. And I was so touched to see, you know, I mean, all of our mothers support us and they show up for us, but your mother literally is physically there with you with the work and, you know, making sure that you have lunch and you've eaten. And it was just so tender and so caring. And I know we'll talk about this later, about centering care in our practices, and to see you and your mother exercising that with each other was just so beautiful to watch. So I'm sure, you know, I'm sure she's so proud of you. And I want to tell our audience that's watching, who we can't see, but we know you're there, that, you know, you're logging in with me. It's 6 p.m. in New York where I'm at, and it's 11 o'clock p.m. where you are. So it's a true gesture of love and friendship that
Of course.
you're locking it at 11 o'clock at night to be here. So
No, it was just, it's really is such a privilege to be here. And, you know, when you sent me the invitation to look at the book, and I started, you know, dipping into it bit by bit. And every time I read something, it resonated with me so deeply. And I started thinking about passages I wanted to share with friends, Caribbean friends who are in the UK, because I knew it would touch them as well. And there was something so, you know, you used that word tender before, and that is exactly how the book feels. The book feels tender and lyrical, and somehow almost like a welcome into a cohort or a family of women that you've been waiting for your whole life. And I think that when I looked at the work and when I listened to the stories, because there's also such a gracious poetry in how each of the women and yourself frame your place and frame the relationship between your practices and waymaking and the different creative ways in which I think Guyanese women artists have been taking, you know, seizing ground and actually really reaffirming their presence around the world. And what really struck me was also the data which you compiled. I mean, the fifth largest community around the world. I had no idea. I
yeah.
had no idea about that. And I really felt like that. I mean, because I grew up with Guyanese people in Barbados, always knew Guyanese people. And, you know, even here in Scotland, I'm always, if I bump into a Caribbean person, they're always Guyanese. They're always Guyanese, the occasional Bajan, but mainly Guyanese. And somehow I think I took that for granted. I think I took it for granted until I actually saw some of the facts and figures which you had there. And it really made me pause and think so much about, why have I not heard this before?
Yeah.
Why have I not heard these stories? Why, even me as a Caribbean person who's deeply invested in the region and in hearing the voices, the narratives from Black women, why is so much of this obscured to me? And it made me think, I felt obviously intense gratitude, but I really kind of, I guess, wondered, what your hopes are for the book, and like what you hope it can do, to in some ways, I guess, close those gaps, because there's a hunger. There's definitely a hunger. I felt the hunger that I didn't even realize I had when I was reading the book, and I just devoured it. I just absolutely devoured it. And, you've graciously said, I can share it with friends here. And, I think it's really one of those books that it'll signify a wonderful, kind of almost foundational attitude to the field of where we are right now and what our forebears have been working for to put us in this place.
Well, I think we'll ask everybody. Kat is our amazing producer behind
So
the scenes.
wonderful.
She's our third person with us, our fourth person with us. I think she's going to pull up. We've prepared just some snaps of literally the book pages, and I'll put in the chat so everyone should know the book has open access editions both in the PDF and the HTML form. So wherever you are, you can actually read the book. Excuse me, pardon my voice. You can access the book completely free online in both PDF and HTML form. So I've put the link, and Kat will make sure that folks can see it. So I think my sister is watching, and I want to let you all know that this is my sister's cover art. This is a photograph taken by my sister that made the cover of the book. So speaking about including our family.
Isn't it amazing how our families also become our editors, our photographers? I think in the last few films I've made, my nephew is a starring actor, and my sister will provide support, and my dad will film. I love it. The whole family show.
It wasn't the original cover. The original cover we had planned didn't work out, and my sister generously offered her artwork. And this is a shot from all of us. My mom, my sister, and I were at the seawall in 2014, and this is the photograph that she took. So I was so, it really filled my heart up, because this book is about women, and it's about sisterhood and friendship and family and community. And so to share this project with my sister was really special to me. So thank you, Candice, Ali, Lindsay, for your beautiful art. And so the book starts with, as I said, with mothers and daughters. And so Keisha Scarville opens the book with this beautiful poetic meditation, both in prose and in photography, thinking about the loss of her mother and returning to Guyana to connect with both her mother and her motherland. So the book actually opens with Keisha Scarville, with Erica de Freitas, and a beautiful mother-daughter team of Natalie and Serena Hopkinson, who write letters to each other. And I know I'm not allowed to say favorites, but those letters that the two of them write to each other in the first part of the book are some of my favorite things too, because they're so real and vulnerable. And what I didn't know, all the things you find out as editor and curator later, is in those letters, they are revealing things to each other for the first time. And so they're doing it with this public audience, And so I can't wait to do the next project with you and your mom and bring,
Oh my God, my mommy.
bring you and your mom and your letters together.
Oh my goodness. I save everything. It's really terrible because I move a lot and then I come and go through my boxes and I just find notes from my family about like lunch or about going to the shops, and it's kind of,
Mhm.
it is beautiful, these letters. And that was something I actually felt a huge amount of, I don't know, awe was in the book, how much you'd managed to balance the textual with the visual. And how
Mhm.
even the way they played on the pages, I think you described it as a visual exhibition on a page, and it really does that.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful just how also artists can write about their work. It's a gift I'm not sure I have, but these artists, they're just, I mean, how Keisha Scarville writes about her mother. It's
Yes.
incredible.
And this is Erica de Freitas, who's also in that first section. This is her grandmother, who was a cake maker in Guyana. And on the next slide, you'll see how Erica de Freitas infuses that personal family history by using the concept and the gestures of cake icing in this beautiful portrait series. And this is her and her mother covered in this cake icing. So I wanted to start the book with mothers and daughters because I thought it was a really beautiful sort of foundation for us to begin. And this is Serena Hopkinson showing us her photographs of migrating from Guyana to Toronto. So the other thing about the book, which you touched on earlier, Alberta, is you're seeing Guyanese people as they left Guyana and they went to New York and they went to Toronto and they went to London and they stayed in Guyana. So you're seeing all of these diasporic points. This part of the book is also very special. It's called The Ones Who Leave and the Ones Who Stay. And I really wanted to emphasize that migration is a two-way street, right? To leave a place, we leave others behind. And I know you feel this both in your practice and your own personal experience, that when we talk about migration, we largely talk about the people doing the leaving. And the people that stay, whether by choice or don't have a choice, or the people that are left in these particular places, their narratives and their stories get eclipsed by the ones doing the leaving. But we can't talk about migration and only talk about the people that are leaving. We have to talk about the people that don't get to leave or choose to stay. And so this body of work by Khadija Ben focuses on portraits of our Amerindian elders who have no desire to leave Guyana. They're born and raised in communities in the Rupununi in Guyana, and they're staying put. And so she gives voice to their stories of what it means for them to make decisions to stay. And it's such a beautiful, fascinating arc of the migration story.
I think,
yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, that it's such an interesting tension between, again, like what is erased in these stories and who we speak about, in terms of that there's a kind of expectation of that gap, what happens when certain people leave and then those that are left behind. But it's almost in times in the writing and in some of the images of the work that there's a hope to still kind of enter into that kind of longing space and inhabit it bodily. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel as though even as a person who's left and is living away from my family, there's still a feeling that I could maybe crawl inside the skin or crawl inside those photographs.
Yes.
And I think, and even, this, I remember when I was reading this by Maria del Pilar Caladín.
Yes.
So I'm looking at it, it's very small on my screen. And I thought so much about, the bravery in sharing this narrative of longing, but also around the uncertainty in return.
Yeah. These are some of your favorites that
These are
you
some of
snagged.
my favorites. I sat a long time with Keisha Scarville's photographs, and I thought so much about, and I don't know if this is the case in your family, about clothing being passed on when someone passes on, and about almost, I don't like to really kind of think about it as the residue, but the aura of that person still being held in that clothing. And these photographs were they really created this very strong sense of affect and spoke so much of that grief in trying to literally crawl back in to that bodily feeling of being with one's mother. And I think even, me living so far from my mom and me being about a head taller than her, I still very much feel that sense of wanting to be absorbed into the scents and the textures of her clothing, which is so, it speaks so much of who she is and how she carries herself. And I love the layers that Keisha brings about in these photographs, and also how she chooses to almost stake claim to these particular environments. She's so firmly rooted. She's so firmly rooted wherever she is, whether she's in the images when you see her on the coastline, or in these more domestic scene. And I was really curious about how they speak about this idea of kind of like being haunted, and almost like trying to encourage that haunting.
Yeah.
And you know Fred de Gois. I found myself thinking about Fred de Gois, of course, because the Guyanese connection, and how Fred de Gois speaks about giving hospitality to ghosts. And these works really made me think so much about that, about the welcoming aspects of being haunted by someone who you love so much, that you can still feel their presence. And I think that sense of haunting, it really is still so much in place when we think about that movement back and forth. Because I think with maybe not everyone, but there's a large sense of that kind of that movement back and forth, and what that means, and almost revisiting an earlier self or an earlier ancestral body of knowledge that you can't even name because your forebears have walked on that land or who've swum in that sea. And there's something about that kind of like sitting in the skin and feeling it just below the surface in these works that really spoke to me so deeply.
And Keisha and Scarville calls that her surrogate skin, which is a beautiful, and even just harkens back to this idea of mothering and motherland. It was important to begin the book with Keisha Scarville's body of work, particularly this body of work, because for most of us in the book, we've left, and in some ways we've lost a Guyana, right? Because the Guyana that is in our imagination is no longer the Guyana that is the reality. So we've lost a kind of Guyana, and to see that embodied in Keisha's work, and how she uses grief and loss to be such a generative thing for her practice, while at the same time grappling with that grief and loss of her mother. So that in itself is this incredible liminal space. You're grappling with tremendous grief and loss of your mother and the connection to your mother's homeland. And at the same time, some of the most beautiful creative work is coming out of that grief. And to hold space for those two things. So those were the things, I was looking for, Alberta, both in either the narratives, you were seeing Grace Nichols's poem on the screen now, or the photography or the art, is how are these women navigating that liminal space, and what is that liminal space for them? Because it's a very different thing for each and every one of them.
Yeah, I think that was another thing, the multiplicity of these different ways of approaching being of the diaspora, whether you're temporarily out of it on a residency like Dominique Hunter, or whether you're constantly in and away from your homeland and thinking about it. And I thought that there was something really, as you say, very generative about locating these ideas with so much intimacy. And I really was so in awe of actually how much was given. And I think, you know, this image, which was one of the last ones by Maria del Pilar Caladine, of her looking out the window, and her father's smile literally made me cry so much.
Oh.
You know, it really did. And I've read her her chapter so many times to speak about that. You know, the UK is going through so much upheaval in terms of how they're really trying to deny the contribution of people from around the world, and especially, you know, people from the Windrush generation who are now being rendered collateral. And I think, you know, that instability, that unstable position, where there was a phrase which you used about the transformation from alien to having status. And I thought so much about that in this photograph, because there's a sense of grief, I think, in the inability to be seen or recognized in the hostile environment of the UK, especially in the time that Maria del Pilar is talking about her family histories, but also for so many people, I think, who leave the Caribbean or leave where they've come from, it's often impossible to return.
Yeah.
And and her father's face is just, and her absorption in what's going on, and how it kind of like they know each other differently from that journey, was so touching. And I mean, it's just incredible that those layers of intimacy that are shared in this beautiful visual exhibition in this book. I wish I had seen the exhibition in the flesh, but I think it's an incredible insight into, I think, you know, the different ways in which creativity or creative acts have really been at the center of, you know, the migrant experience. And you've used some really beautiful quotes about that remaking, you know, which, here you go.
Well, earlier you were asking me what, you know, have I thought about what my goals are for this project? And Maria del Pilar Caldine and all the women are an example of that goal, which is Guyanese women are some extraordinary women.
Absolutely.
They are some extraordinary women. We are not known as artistic, creative people as much as we should. And to be able to convey that in just this one project. And Alberta, there's so many more people that I wanted in this project, but you know, you can only have a book of a certain number of pages, and you know, first we had to get it out into the world. But what Guyanese women have been doing and are doing, not only in Guyana, but beyond Guyana and for Guyana, is nothing short of extraordinary. And this is Maria's passion, and her commitment is to talk about the Windrush generation. Her next book is actually telling those stories of what it means to be children of the Windrush generation and how that legacy is passed on. And so to read her story and to read about the racial violence that was done to her, the emotional and racial violence that was done to her, and to see that the thing that originally served for her and her father as the thing that distanced them, which is he didn't want to talk about Guyana and where he came from, was the thing that ended up bridging their relationship again and bringing them back together. You know, that's another example of what liminal space means
Mm.
for Maria and Maria's story. That the thing that fractured your relationship is the thing that brings your father-daughter relationship back together in some ways. And for me, this shot is like the perfect symbol.
It's amazing. It's
This
just
shot, and her husband
amazing.
took the shot, this photograph. And so we're so grateful that he let us put it in the book. But all of these kinds of, you know, ways that they've been thinking about liminality and what liminal spaces means to them has been extraordinary. I'm actually curious if you think of this phrase for your own self or your practice, and how you think of this idea of liminal spaces.
You know, I guess for me, when I think about how you've described the liminal space, for me, it's very much, I guess, it's a meditation between that movement that's always, I think, in the corner of my eye. You know, there's a very acute sense of being from somewhere else, but also a country that is so deeply embedded in the colonial story, but how that story is largely absent. And in my work, it is very much founded by this idea of grief, and trying to think about mourning and the idea of awake in terms of looking after those who have passed on, but also to try and imagine a way of healing through that. And I think this book, like I think so much of the curatorial work that you and I have really been trying to focus on, has been so much around that movement between witnessing and healing, and what is possible in between those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there were any other slides that you wanted to focus on before we give Kat a slide break. And then come back to, this is something that I do want to come back to later, but I wanted to hint at it for the folks watching. And this is just to celebrate my amazing, incredible friend, Alberta Whittle, and some of the wonderful work that she's been doing. This is the body of work that you've done called In Transit, and it actually speaks to these issues of migration and transition. And you're particularly looking at this connection between the West Indies and South Africa by virtue of sugar and you know, sugar farming. And so I want to, or maybe you want to do, it's up to you, but I definitely wanted to share with the audience that your work, that you have been committed to thinking about these issues of what is lost and what is gained, the violence of migration. And this work is, you talk a lot about the sexual violence in this journey, which is something that, you know, is not particularly a narrative within the Guyanese story of migration in particular, but to see that other Caribbean women artists are engaging that issue very provocatively and very seriously is so important. So it's up to you if you want to come back to it, but I just wanted to highlight it very quickly.
Oh, that's really, really kind of you. I think, you know, I was going to speak a little bit about Dominique's work, but I can actually, I think, speak about it in terms maybe of In Transit and the impossibility of returning. Because those two works, I think, kind of link in. Something when Dominique was writing about her work, she spoke so much about transplantation. Transplanting, just making up words now. And I found myself thinking so much around how we understand growth and movement and diaspora. And I loved how she framed her practice within this idea of what it means to plant and to cultivate and to grow. And there was a part of me that really felt as though this is, in a way, it's a movement back towards decolonial ways of understanding community and, you know, early migratory routes. And when I was in South Africa and I was preparing, in fact, let me move to this one, Impossibility of Return. I was in West Africa, I was in Ghana for a festival, and I was making some work with a very dear friend of mine. And just the house which we were working from, Brazil House, overlooked the slave fort, which had so many uses. The slave fort had been turned into a neighborhood. There were people living in there who'd set up homes because it seemed like it was quite abandoned. There was also a temporary school that would crop up and kids would be in there learning their lessons. And I always felt this huge reluctance to go into that space. For me, it was still a place really very seriously haunted by grief and haunted by something very sacred that I didn't feel necessarily I had a right to be in that space. And when I was in Ghana, I'd felt this when I was planning the trip, there was a very deep sense of reluctance, I think in a very spiritual way, to think of Ghana as home. Because I'd heard so many people talk about, West Africa in particular being the motherland. And I think on some very psychic level, that tear that severed me from wherever on the continent, because it is still impossible to name, felt so deep that when I was in Ghana, I couldn't contemplate it until I went finally on my last day in Ghana. There was a photography festival that was going on, and with some friends and with my dear friend Dean, we went into the fort, and it was abandoned. It was absolutely quiet. And I found myself just crying, just absolutely crying. And there was this sense that I couldn't ignore, that on some level I recognized the space. And immediately I also felt my body change. I felt almost on a very cellular level a sense of what my presence would have meant in that time if I had been there, if I'd been alive, or if my forebears had been there. And it was very much this sense of reproductive capitalism and the potential, the rape that would have happened and the racial violence that would have happened to my body in this space. And so much of the architecture was still in place in the fort, but also aspects of it were missing. And I just felt as though I needed to, in some way, create this connection to somehow give me a way to work through that tear, that psychic tear that I was so aware had happened. And I felt as though I had to press myself with every fiber in my being into the walls, into the archway of this, within the building, within the architecture of the fort, because I felt as though something of my ancestors would be there, whether it would be salt or sweat or menstrual fluid or blood or tears. I had to somehow find a way to connect with my own grief and my own salt and sweat and tears to that, to the dust and the haunted presence that was very much there. And it was really interesting because I did a series of basically actions where I was trying to connect with this other form of knowledge that I could not name, and I probably still can't name. And when I looked at some of the photographs afterwards that Dean took, there's one where it actually looks like there's a face coming through, and I don't know where that's come from, but it's very much there. And I think with the layering that Dominique does and how she speaks about, for me, what is a decolonial language, to think about growth, and growth as being a way of understanding one's presence on the earth. It felt very, very powerful, and also almost akin to, I think, what I was trying to do, because I felt very transplanted. I felt that severing so deeply being in Ghana. And I found the language you used almost to kind of like inform a new frame, a new methodology for how to understand migration that I found so helpful. And if we think about that work in connection with the In Transit series, I was very lucky again that a dear friend, Holly Bino, was in Barbados when I was making the photographs, the images. And I was coming to close for residency at Fresh Milk, which is a wonderful residency space in Barbados. And we got up incredibly early. I think of my last day at the residency. Oh, it's just the one just before the other one. And we ended up going to this cane field. And again, whenever I'm in certain landscapes, there's a very strong sense of hauntedness that, again, is very difficult to name. And I found myself thinking about the physiology of my body and when I'm in different environments and how when I drink the water in a place or I eat the food in a place, my body again changes. And it means that I might be more sensitive to certain things, or it might mean that I'm actually again connecting on a very cellular level with the land. And I allowed myself in this time in the cane field with Holly to actually really kind of like connect with the dirt, to connect with the earth. Kat, it's the slide just before this one, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, maybe it's the ones afterwards, which are in the field. It might be after that.
It's the second file. It's the second PDF.
Sorry.
So we'll
Sorry,
continue chatting
Yeah,
while
no,
pull
it's
that
no
up.
problem.
Thanks, Kat.
That's fine. And when I was in the cane field, I was thinking very much again about racialized violence and the plantation yard as being a site of that and a site of miscegenation. But again, thinking about how to make these things visible. And it felt as though the only way in which I could really do this was to actually connect with literally the stakes of sugarcane, to think about the roots, to think about all of the dirt and the residue of my ancestors' labor. And in the talk I did earlier today, my the person I was doing the talk with, this wonderful historian artist, Adabusola Ramsey, she actually told me that I've still been paying for the slave owners through my taxes up until 2015. So the compensation, I've been paying for that compensation up until 2015. And it's really quite startling for me now looking at these images in this cane field to think about my labor as a Black woman still supporting slavery. And it was it's something which is still really it's very painful to acknowledge that. But when I was preparing the work for the exhibition in Cape Town, which was part of a group show called Woman Object Corpse, it was actually a group show which was looking at gendered violence. So it wasn't long after Reva Steenkamp had been murdered by Oscar Pistorius. There'd been a number of curative rapes where Black women and colored women in South Africa had been murdered. And it was also around the time of the Delhi gang rape and the woman dying because of her injuries. And we really all wanted to come together to actually speak about this being an ongoing story that begins with racial capitalism. And so when I was making the work, I wanted to very much bring about the sensoriness of the molasses. So if you look at it might be the second slides, Kat, if you go through a couple of them. So these are some of the photographs that we took in the cane field in Barbados. You can go to the next one. And this is a wide view of the installation. And if you see in the center, there's a white, it's a cairn that's made of different sacks that were used to transport spices. And then above me, I'm in the center. and there are all these different Hessian sacks, and on the Hessian sacks I've embroidered certain phrases to come out which speak all about capitalism and how race and colonialism have fed into that. So product of where it's come from, export. And the one at the top, which is just above that flashing light, actually that's where molasses is slowly dripping onto me, and I'm in the center of that well. And that well also reflects cairns. So this is traditional burial that you find in South Africa, which is when you see stones made into a circle. And so it was a durational performance for about 3.5 hours where I was in there. And eventually you can turn to, I think there's a couple more slides where you see different aspects of the performance. And so by the end of it, it almost looked as though I was completely covered in it. But also what was interesting, people didn't think I was real. They thought I was some kind of mannequin that was in there. I'd actually stopped being human. I'd stopped being alive in the performance. Even when I moved, there was this really interesting uncertainty of how to read my body. Even when I literally did move and I caught the molasses at times. Yeah, that's the final image.
So powerful, Alberta. So powerful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's a good segue for me to ask you about your hyphen roles, artist hyphen curator.
I need to take off some of those hyphens.
And I wanna ask you how you balance. These are on their own. They're both roles with tremendous responsibility. And so I want to ask you how you balance artist and curator, and then how do you also negotiate the boundaries one must keep between artist and curator. So I teach for art and public policy, where I'm professor of arts politics at NYU. I teach a course called Curatorial Activism. And I have some pretty, clear kind of, I wouldn't say rules is too harsh, but about curatorial ethics, about curatorial responsibility, about curatorial accountability, and about curatorial boundaries, And so I would love to hear.
Those are big words.
Yes,
my goodness.
they are.
Where do I start with those things?
Well, our series is called Curators in Conversation, so we have to have a little bit of curatorial conversation. And our chat is blowing up too, so I want to give us some time to get to some of our audience's questions. But if you can talk about how you do balance, the role of artist and curator. And then after that, I want us to talk about this beautiful concept that you are formulating and thinking through in your scholarship, which is wayward curating, which I was reading about that paper. You wrote this beautiful paper, Miss Future PhD.
Oh my goodness.
And
I hope so.
We have to talk about wayward curating. But first, I'm really curious how you balance these roles of artist curator.
I think in some ways, I guess it stems also from being an interdisciplinary artist. And so for me, it's very much dependent on what I'm called to do. And I think of myself a bit as a matchmaker. So often when I meet people, I'm like, you need to meet this person. This person would be so good for you to talk to. And I feel really lucky because the opportunity to curate exhibitions and bring people into that journey with me has felt so useful, and in some ways really feeds into my ideas for my own work. And I feel like they're not necessarily that disparate. I try and not think of them as disparate because Collaboration, I learned about collaboration through my curating. I don't think I ever really properly collaborated until I started being a curator. And then I understood much more, I think, about the fact that everything really should be shared. And if we're talking about maybe wayward curating, for me, a lot of that stems from working collaboratively with others, but also in terms of trying to not necessarily strive to mirror existing curatorial forms. So I started doing my curating largely with very tentatively I started curating photography for a couple of festivals in Glasgow, and then I was invited to be part of a committee for an artist-run space called Transmission in Glasgow. And I think working with other artists was really key, because suddenly we realized that these would be ways for us to also support our community and support conversations that we're missing. And when I decided to join the committee, it was very much with a sense of approaching our curatorial model from a decolonial aspect, and actually not strive to mirror the existing models that the institution had before. And so we changed the model of our institution from being a largely white organization to being entirely run by people of color. And so that really was a big reckoning for the city. It was a huge reckoning, because that visibility and that deliberate act was almost like a gauntlet being thrown down. I think there was a sense of anxiety for what that meant, and that there were huge gaps in cultural equity in the country, not just in Glasgow, but actually in Scotland and in the UK, because we were very public about this change. We're very, very public. We were an institution that had been around since 1983. And then in 2016, suddenly we decided that actually this model could no longer stand. The city was changing. There were many more, it became a lot more mixed. And it felt as though people who had been in Scotland who were Black or people of color had to leave. And there was a huge history of a negative diaspora. And so because we were so concerned about that, it felt really important to address that absence and erasure. And so curatorially, it became so much about trying to find ways to support each of us during that very hard transition. And it was a hard transition, but also it coincided with massive cuts in funding for the arts. And it was a very tricky time. It's a very tricky time. But now they've found their feet, my committee, and they're doing great things. I'm very lucky. I've sadly left. I had to leave because you're only really supposed to do it for 2 years, but I did it for 3. And yeah, they're doing amazing things.
So, for the folks watching, I'm gonna ask Kat to put the link to Alberta's article titled "Biting the Hand of Feeds You: A Strategy of Wayward Curating." So hopefully you can access it. Sorry, but I'm really, let me just have a moment. I'm really proud of you.
Oh.
Melody read your incredible bio, but there are some things that we couldn't say about what will happen, what will be revealed about this, in the darkest of years. First of all, let me just in the darkest of years, that I have a book in the world, that we have ushered a book into the world in this year, in 2020.
You are doing great things.
I mean, it's only the gods. I mean, it's really only by the grace of the gods, and that you are having the year that you are having in your practice, and then folks will see even more amazing things that will be revealed that we can't say. But I just want to say that I am just so proud of you. And
I'm proud of you too.
I know we're the same age and I'm sounding like a mama, but
I love it. I'm welcoming it. I'm welcoming a bit of sisterly motherling.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm so just happy for you. So happy for you, because you are fundamentally a beautiful human. And, you know, it's so nice to see beautiful humans thriving, and getting what they deserve from the universe, because you just emanate kindness and generosity. The fact that it's midnight in Glasgow, you're up doing that little talk with me.
No, this is such an honor, Grace. It's such an honor. And as I said earlier, it really is a pleasure. This is a book that in every way has shook me. In every way, this book has shook me, and only in good ways. I have absolutely, I don't know, been changed irrevocably from reading this book. And I'm so grateful that it is in the world, because I think, you know, I think I was really lucky that when I was growing up in Barbados, I was so aware of, you know, Caribbean artists doing great things. But actually, I feel as though there hasn't been a book of this kind that I can name. You know, I can't name another book that is right now that is doing what you're doing for Caribbean women artists. You know, I know it's obviously about Guyanese women artists, but I can't say any book that's doing this for Caribbean women artists. And I think that, you know, you're slowly closing that void, that absence, that erasure. And I'm so proud of you as well, because if I think about those conversations in Havana over our lunches with my mommy, you know, and now here we are having this talk, it's just glorious, just absolutely glorious.
Thank you.
It really is. And I'm really happy to share in your success.
Well, and I'm sharing my gratitude for your friendship, because I actually want to point back to when you're defining wayward curating, which I love, and I hope to see that in your book soon. From my lips to God's ears, Wayward Curating by Alberta Whittle. But in your definition of this concept of wayward curating, you talk about mutual care, and you talk about, you know, ethics, but you also talk about friendship.
Oh my goodness, friendship is at the core of this.
And
Friendship
that's
is
what
really at the core.
I want to get, you know, I said this to one of my students the other day. She was telling me about her, you know, her best friend and partner in this cultural work that she's doing. And I said to her, if you hold on to that friendship as you move through your career and build and sustain that friendship, I guarantee you that will probably be one of the most important facets of your success and your friend's success.
I totally agree with you.
And I don't think we talk critically enough about friendships in our field. And I'll share with you quickly. So our dear, you know, the person we love so much, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, incredible Cuban artist. The reason why I was in Cuba was Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. So she's the reason that, you know, our paths crossed. She talks so beautifully about these 40-year-old friendships that she's had with, you know, some pretty big names now in the art world, both curators, scholars, artists, that how they, you know, the same way that they were getting on buses and trains 40 years ago and showing up for each other at their openings, it's the same way they do that 40 years later now. And that has been the one through line. If they look at the trajectory of their careers, that has been the one through line that has sustained their careers, is these 4 decades long friendships that they've cultivated with other women.
You know, I there's something so rich in that. And I feel like I just have to say, you know, when I make my work or when I do my curating or when I write something, it is really for my community. It's for my friends. It's for my friends. It's for my family. It is a dedication in every way to the people I love. And if I think about dark times in my practice and I'm just like, what on earth are you doing this work? I'm able to call on these friends, on these accomplices who remind me why I'm doing this. And, you know, we spoke about the negative diaspora, but we actually never spoke about the people who feel so unsupported that they can't keep on making and they can't keep on,
Yes.
you know, making however that is, you know, whether that's writing, whether that's doing, you know, crochet, like in the book, whether that's making something creative, you know, it's we never speak about them and somehow they vanish. And I think we really need to remember that our friends do become accomplices, but they also remind us of why we're doing this, and they galvanize us, and they are the nourishment that Dominique speaks about when she speaks about transplanting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think in wayward curating, I struggle a bit with hierarchies. I really do, because I think we're all in it together. We're all in this together. I'm doing this for you. You're doing this for me. There's no such thing as doing any of this on our own. That just doesn't exist. It really doesn't exist. No one is doing anything by themselves. There's always someone who told them something that reminds them of something that they know. And I feel as though in those friendships, everything is possible. You can dream other ways and you can have your most honest and difficult conversations. You know, when I speak about parrhesia, it's also within those friendship groups. It's in those friendship groups because the tenderness is there to make you actually speak your truth and hear and learn from those conversations, you know.
It's 7 here, and we're gonna start taking comments and questions from you, lovely. Thank you, Natalie, for that beautiful comment. I'll read it again in a minute. We'll start taking comments and questions from them in a second, Alberta, but I wanted to share with you that one of the things that, and I actually am a little embarrassed that I didn't know this and I didn't realize this, but we've been doing a few of these. We have about 10 talks that we're doing this fall on this book. I mean, it's been an incredible reception, and I'm just really so humbled by it. And one of the things that keeps coming up from the Guyanese women when we gather, we did a big book launch last week, hosted by our publisher in Cambridge. And what keeps resonating from the 15 women that are gathered in this book is how this book, this little object, has reignited a sense of community among Guyanese women, and particularly Guyanese women creatives. And what I didn't realize, and this is the part that I'm a little embarrassed about, because for me, every other word is Guyana. You know, it's just how I roll, because I'm just incredibly right. I'm incredibly proud of, you know, this place that shaped me into who I am. But what I didn't realize, that there was a sense of isolation and loneliness from a lot of Guyanese women artists who were invoking Guyana in their practices and bringing Guyana constantly into their work. And instead of feeling, you know, a sense of community because of that, they actually felt alone because of that. And this book has allowed them to feel that sense of community and camaraderie and sisterhood. And if there's nothing else about this project that we've managed to accomplish, that is the general sentiment about what it's done in terms of the effect it's had. I am absolutely so grateful. And so that's why I wanted to ask you about this idea of friendship, because as sentimental as it might sound, it's actually quite critically important to the work that we do.
But I think it's radical. I think it's actually more than that. I think it's a radical thing to claim sisterhood or to claim friendship or accomplices, however feels good for you, because I think there's an inordinate amount of shame in tenderness. And I think actually, there's always there's an expectation of both overproduction, but also overt professionalism. And I think that there's something about friendship which is not meant to figure within that. We're meant to be just competing with each other. We're not actually meant to be taking joy or pleasure in our work in that way. And I think when we speak about friendship, it is also a way of speaking about love for ourselves and a commitment to actually learning and our own growth and our own self-compassion. Because if we're real about this, it's friendships that keep us honest. It's friendships that keep us humble, and it's friendships that keep us growing. And I think that it is a very radical thing to center your work through friendships and through collaboration, because it's the kind of, it's a way of, in some ways, not necessarily buying into the systems which we already know are oppressing so many of us, even on a small scale. It's a way of centering on love.
I saw this article, I haven't read it, but I saved it, where the headline was, I'm butchering the headline, but the headline said something of, what if we made friendships the main relationships of our lives, not marriages? And
I'm down with that.
So I saved it to read it later. I'm going to switch to my hosting cap for a minute and start reading some of these beautiful, lovely responses and questions that we've been getting. Natalie Willis, who was part of Curators in Conversation a few weeks ago. Hi, Natalie. Thank you for joining us. Heartbreakingly beautiful discussion, and it's making everything feel all the more possible. Thank you both so much. And Natalie has a question for you, Alberta.
Thank you, Natalie.
And she's saying yes to centering love, sisterhood, friendship, and tenderness in our creative cultural work. So Natalie's question is, in thinking of Alberta's comment on feeling comfortable speaking to certain subjects or engaging subjects versus others when she was in Ghana, what does the idea of permission mean for liminal beings and people in liminal spaces?
Oh, that's a really good question. I can only really speak for myself, and I really did feel as though I needed permission to go into the fort. And there was a lot of agency was given to me, but it was something I felt as though I had to wait for, because I also don't think it's a big assumption to think that I can go and speak of that story, as a Caribbean person. And I didn't want to necessarily go in with that attitude that it was my right to go and speak of that. And so wherever I am, I'm very conscious that, when I'm looking at place and geography, which I do often, it's with very much the lens of thinking about it in terms of my perspective as a Caribbean person and thinking about the commonalities in that experience. And, I've worked for a long time with my good friend Farida Nazir, who I think you had a picture of the work, Right of Admission. And when I first started working with Farida, she spoke with an elder in her community. And, she said, with Alberta spending so much time here, what does this mean? Because we have this history of people coming and extracting knowledge, in South Africa particularly. And I thought, I felt actually incredibly grateful that she had flagged this to me very early on in my time in South Africa, because I'd known Frida since studying together in Glasgow. And I felt that actually really helped me, because then I could really focus on what almost thinking about affect in terms of geography from a very personal perspective. And it really made me counter and check my privilege constantly when I was operating in that space and think about the lens of authority and how I didn't necessarily want to participate in that. And it very much had to always be part of my liminal space or my liminal perspective on things.
Love that. Luciana Paulney wants us to know what a lovely book. Thank you, Luciana.
Such a good book.
We appreciate it. And Alan McFarlane. Hi, Alan. Thank you for joining. Alan is reminding us that Small Axe, Steve McQueen's Small Axe, is set to, I think next week, is set to debut. Mark your Amazon subscription Prime Video for those of you For those of you who don't know, Steve McQueen has created this incredible series, television series that's airing now, I think, on the BBC where you are, and will start airing in the States, I think, next week on Amazon Prime, looking at the stories of the Windrush generation and the narratives of other British Caribbean immigrants to the UK. And I do believe that a Guyanese character will center one of those stories, right? So thank you for reminding us about that. Alan does have a question for us, and I'll let you take the lead on it, Albert. What narratives does this book debunk or raise up or question?
Oh, for me, in terms of debunking, it was about, I guess, thinking about the sprawling nature of like diaspora, which I hadn't necessarily, I really did not have any of that information to hand. When I think about the Caribbean in terms of like its global spread, living in the UK, it actually feels very small. I think the Caribbean population is maybe 4%, if that, of the whole population. It feels very, very small. And I thought that the book really did so much in terms of affirming our place and our role in reshaping countries and changing the story and being creative and impacting society. I thought the book really did that so eloquently.
Well, I can't answer what did it debunk because I'm behind the making of it, but I'll say what I hoped that it did. I hope that people, just on a very basic level, when you see this concentration of Guyanese women creatives, that it ignites a curiosity about all of the other Guyanese women creatives spread out in the world and what they're capable of and what they're doing. Because to see just this small portion of them in this book, you know, for me, it's so inspiring, even though I've been knee deep in this project for so long. So I hope it ignites that kind of interest and curiosity about what other Guyanese women artists are doing around the world.
I think even though it is obviously, it's so much about Guyanese women artists, I think, Caribbean women of all islands and countries, what this book will resonate with, because it's a way of seeing ourselves. And, we're so largely absent. And I'm really, just so excited by the research you've shared. And I'm going to spend some more time with the women artists who are in the book as well. I can't wait to spend a bit more time with their work.
And you'll get to meet them, I'm sure, because, we're everywhere.
I know.
So I'm going to we're going to do final thoughts and wrap up. And unless anyone from our audience wants to pop in a last final question or comment, is it 1 yet there, or it's midnight, Alberta?
It's time? 1:15 midnight.
It's quarter past 12. It's 1:15 midnight, and so I would like my friend to go to bed. And I'll just say thank you so much for being an honorary Guyanese. You know you are.
You know it. I'll claim it.
And thank you for just the incredible generosity you've shown to this book from day one, and the care with which you opened its pages. And I could feel just, for everyone that's watching, we had a little warm-up conversation to this conversation. And I could feel just the amount of time that you spent poring over these stories and these narratives. And it means so much to me, and it means so much to all of the women in this book. So thank you, my dear friend.
Oh, thank you. And please thank everyone who's participated in this beautiful book. We're truly grateful. You've gifted us something so special. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone keep a Google alert on Alberta Whittle, because she's doing big things, extraordinary things. Thank you, everyone. Kat, as always, you're amazing behind the scenes. Thank you.
Kat, thank you.
Producing the hell out of this. And Melody Capote, thank you always for being the incredible executive director of CCCADI that you are. Good night, everyone. Alberta, you stay.